Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the College of Law Admission to Practice Academy. My name is Ann-Maree David. I'm an Executive Director with the College of Law, and it's my great privilege and pleasure to be moderating this session tonight on Coming to the Law Late in Life. We have a fabulous panel who are going to share their career pathways and stories with us this evening. I'll introduce them briefly, and then we're going to have a conversation with each of them and discover just what they bring to law. And believe you me, there are some extraordinary stories here, lots to learn, lots to share. So without further ado, can I introduce you to Katie Lush? And you might wave, panel members, so we know who's who. Katie Lush is a current law student who will complete her legal studies in early 2021. And she has an extraordinary background, which she'll speak to very shortly. Our second panellist is Dr. Patricia Petersen, trained as a nurse and then followed many pursuits, including studying through to a PhD and even studying acting at NIDA. Can't wait to hear more about that from you, Patricia. Then we have Clare Jobson. Clare credits her early career with travelling the world. She was a nurse and she brings that now to her practice as a family lawyer. And we want to know more about how those two careers blend. And last, and by no means least, we have Matthew Hickey. Matthew is a highly regarded barrister who works across a diverse areas of practice. But prior to coming to law, Matthew was a professional operatic tenor. I want to know whether he uses that talent of his in the courtroom. But let's see what we can learn from each of these panel members this evening. I encourage everyone to become involved in the conversation tonight. You'll have a chat button there at the bottom of your screen. Don't be afraid to use it. All questions will be available to all of the panel members. You might like to actually address one panel member specifically or put it out more generally to all of us to respond to. So let's get started. Katie, you're going to be my first victim this evening. You're just now finishing your law degree. How did you get here and how long did it take from leaving school to coming into law school?
That might be a giveaway of my age. So
I say nothing.
A long time, substantial amount of time. So interesting enough, when I left school, my first two options on my QTAC form were law, and I didn't get in. So I had to sort of take a bit of a detour, do some other things along the way. So it's many years later, I'm finally getting there. It's very exciting.
And what did you do in that time?
Well, I left school, a bit of a disaster really. Left school and didn't actually get into anything at all. I had to scramble and ended up doing the oddest degree somewhere I didn't want to be, and lasted a whole 6 months and dropped out and got a job. So worked for 6 months and then went back, realised I'd like to do teaching. So I did a Bachelor of Primary School Teaching, specialising in music. So I ended up as a primary school music specialist in the end when I finished, and worked for a couple of years for Queensland Ed in a fabulous job teaching instrumental music and classroom music, which was a lot of fun. Got to do bands and choirs and all of that fun music stuff. And then I fell pregnant, and I went on to have 3 children in 3 years. Quick succession, and didn't go back to teaching. So my husband actually is from a farming family, so we went out west, 12,000 acre property, and we're farming for a few years, and then we've come back to town. He then got a job for the DPI, and so in that time I stayed home and raised the kids, and then when our older I think our youngest was about 9 or so, we took up the challenge to become foster carers. And so we then got a family group of 3 more children. So twins, 1-year-old twins and a 3-year-old, their brother. So a full sibling group, which was just such a blessing. So I ended up with 6 kids, and a very large car and a very, very busy life. So so I've spent most of my, the last 20 plus years running around after my 6 children. My eldest son was an elite athlete, so he played hockey for Queensland for quite a few years. So that meant a lot of tripping around, a lot of logistics to get him to all these things. Anyone who's had an elite athlete child will know all of the special issues that brings in terms of the amount of work. So that with 6 children is an additional things I used to do. I used to joke that I thought I could run the army with the logistical exercises I had to do on a daily basis.
Well,
so I'd have,
just a very specific skill.
It was incredible. So so anyway, I had the blessing of my 3 older children all grew up and finished school and left home, and I still got my 3 younger ones at school. But it hammered home to me how quickly, when your whole life is raising your children, they suddenly leave and become adults. And the question is, and then what? What do I do? I'd let my registration lapse as a teacher, so I was no longer qualified to be a teacher. I would have to actually redo the whole degree actually to become a teacher again. And I didn't really want to be a teacher again. So then I was like, well, what do I actually want to do? And it was then that I realised, I sort of remembered that law was something I was really interested in high school, and thought, oh well, I'll give that a go. And so I enrolled and just loved it from the first lecture. I just went, oh, this is where I'm meant to be. And it's been amazing. I've just loved every minute of law school, and it's been an excellent journey. And I have been the quintessential plodder. So I've done it part-time. I wasn't in a hurry. I didn't have to. I'm in a very fortunate situation, I guess, where we've been a single income family for so long, it didn't make any difference as to how long I took to do it. And it was really, so my husband's incredibly excited about the 2 incomes that are happening next year. It's a whole new world. So that's kind of how it all happened. And it's been an amazing journey through law school. It's been just incredible, yeah.
And Katie, was it a major adjustment for you to come into the law school classrooms, if you like, with newly departed high schoolers, I suppose?
Well, that's a funny story, because both my sons, because I was studying part-time, I was in first year with both my sons. So they started uni. My eldest son started uni the same year I did, and my next son started uni the following year. And because I was part-time, I was in first year with both of them. So that was a little bit embarrassing for them. Yeah. It's just like a wave at them on campus or anything.
So have they continued on with law degrees?
No, they weren't doing law. My eldest son was doing teaching, and my other son got a scholarship to mechatronic engineering. So, which is completely different fields. But same university, so that was nice.
And Katie, I suspect, like so many people who have made parenting their career, you may well want to tell me that you didn't have any skills to offer a prospective employer in legal practice. Is that right? Well,
it was a concern mostly because I had this 20+ year employment gap. I had not been formally employed for well over 20 years. And, you know, when you start law school, there's all the talk about building your resume, and you know, if you're straight out of school, well, they sort of expect you'll have a part-time job, or you won't have a lot of work experience necessarily. But when you're at my age, there's kind of an expectation you'll have this fairly large amount of work experience, which I didn't have. I had 2 years of full-time work experience as a teacher, and that was it. And that was 20+ years ago. So, that was a great deal of concern as to how do I bridge that, and what would employers think of that when I, started to look for legal jobs. So interestingly enough, I guess just the sort of mindset that helps you succeed in law was the mindset I took to, I guess, parenting, and to be very active. I guess I've got a very active mind. I kind of notice that most lawyers do. And so I just instinctively, to fill in that sort of 20+ year period, I did an enormous amount of volunteering. So I ended up, like, I was president of the kindy, president of the playgroup, ran every position in the hockey club and the cricket club. And I mean, even I'm always like, I'm standing around here on a Saturday, I'll learn how to umpire. So I became a level 1 hockey umpire just because I was there, and I can do that. That volunteering things, I never even thought about it. I ran our community. We had a combined carols with the local city council. I ran that, the whole music program, for 5 years doing that. lot of in community involvement with things, just because I could. I felt I had the time, and I was able to. So I just was happy to put my hand up to do whatever needed doing, and didn't realise that that's actually the work skills I was developing. Enormous amount of work skills, and organisational skills and administrative skills and all of those sorts of things in that volunteering capacity. And what surprised me when I started going for interviews, that's actually what was looked at and really talked about, was the volunteering things, which to that point I just hadn't even thought about as being anything other than I was just keeping myself occupied. So that was good. That turned out to be a really a surprise how important that was actually in the end.
And I think one of your volunteer roles was particularly important in terms of readying you for a legal practice career.
Absolutely. So interesting enough, when I first had law school, the Dean of our law school, he gives a spiel, and I've sat through it about 8 times now, so I could almost cite it to you. But he really pushes the point of start building your volunteer resume in law for law students. And I guess in law students, they're looking at the law societies and volunteering on the law societies and getting all of that volunteer things. And unfortunately, I sat there going, I've been volunteering out my ears. I don't need to start building a volunteer resume. So I went, well, what can I do that is actually law related to volunteering? So I went off and got qualified as a JP. And I thought that'd be a good, because it relates to the law. And then I chose to volunteer in our local courthouse, because you get a lot more meaty legal issues as a JP in the courthouse, because the police station's next door, so you get search warrants and arrest warrants and things, and lots more mortgages and title things, and just really interesting legal material, which was brilliant to see how that courthouse material, affidavits, doing all of that, how all the annexes, affidavits and things, fantastic knowledge that you don't get at law school. And it was from there that the registrar of the courthouse actually offered me a position in the courthouse. So I then went on to be a clerk in the magistrates court, and that was just brilliant experience. Yeah. Great.
And now, of course, you're going to be starting in a grad program come 2021. Yes. Congratulations.
Yes. Cannot wait. Yeah. It's very exciting. So yes, I got the clerkship with Shine Lawyers, and now I've got the graduate position starting when I graduate. So yeah.
Lovely. Fantastic. All right, we might leave you there and we'll come back to you. I'd like to go to you now, Dr. Patricia Petersen, who has a very, very full resume. You've done, I think, everything. I can't imagine how you fitted it all in. So Patricia, tell us, you started life out as a nurse, but you didn't stop there. What happened? What was the decision there?
Well, I actually wanted to go to university when I finished year 12, but my father was quite ill. He had to finish up with his work. He just was too ill to continue on, and my parents were very poor and they simply could not afford for me to go to university. It was as simple as that. So I thought nursing is the next best thing. So in those days they had in-hospital training, so that's why I ended up a nurse. Even way back then I was studying part-time, doing various things. I had always planned on going to university, so I saved up my money, a lot of money, in fact, to just get me through my degree. And so while I was doing my first degree as well, which was a Bachelor of Arts honours in philosophy, I had 3 jobs to get myself through that as well. I worked really hard, and I was offered a full scholarship to do my PhD at the University of Queensland, and also a teaching position to assist me financially whilst I was doing the PhD. And then from there, pretty much I just wanted to be an academic. And it wasn't until I was about 50 that I decided to have a career change. I had been thinking about studying law for quite some time, and philosophy and law go hand in hand very nicely. My friends laugh that I can identify a non sequitur a mile away. It's a running joke, and for those who don't know what that is, it's just there can be, you know, two premises to an argument, and then there'll be a conclusion to it. And a lot of people will make the mistake of assuming something from those two premises, where I'm the first to say, well, actually, it doesn't necessarily follow, and then you come up with alternative potential conclusions from that information, from those premises. So again, it was always something that I wanted to do. My friends and family, when I told them I was enrolling in a law degree, thought, oh, she's turned 50. She's just trying to, as graciously as possible, see through, you know, a midlife crisis. And it wasn't until I was really into second, third year and very involved in the process of learning and so on, that they understood that I was serious about it. And then there was something I wanted to say in this podcast, and that is for the students out there who are finishing their degrees, or maybe they're finished, they're just about to do PLT. One thing I told myself, which was really helpful whilst I was doing the law degree and soon after the law degree, is I never said to myself, why should I do that? Why would I do that? I always said to myself, why shouldn't I do that? Or why wouldn't I do that? So any opportunity that landed in my lap, or anything that I could see that I might be able to do that might help me get voluntary work, or further down the track get some sort of paid employment, I absolutely embraced that opportunity, or those opportunities. Some people might think, oh, by doing that, really you're just a slave, you know, you're doing voluntary work and it just goes on and on and on, and when are you going to get a paid job? I honestly believe if you're prepared to not view it as a means to an end, but a means in itself, as in a way of educating yourself, furthering your experience, getting the skills, the qualifications that you need in order to function as a lawyer once you are fully employed and working for someone, I think that will absolutely be of benefit to you. And again, I'm speaking to the students out there who are thinking, oh, look, I've got my study, maybe I shouldn't volunteer at a law firm, maybe I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that. Honestly, I really encourage you to just throw yourselves into the mix. It's an opportunity to network. It's an opportunity to get to know people. And even if you do voluntary work for a law firm and maybe they won't have a position for you, chances are they're going to know someone who will. And if you've done a good job, and I wanted to say something about that as well, if you've done a good job as a voluntary lawyer, word will spread that you're devoted, you're reliable, you're committed. And in terms of bringing maturity to the table, those are the things that a mature person can bring to the table. I can honestly say when I was at ATSLS, I made sure that I was the first person there. I was there at the door. Doors were locked. I made sure that I was there before anyone else. I made sure that my boss was kicking me out at the end of the day to say, go home. I did that every single day that I was there, and that was driving from Ipswich to Toowoomba. Not one day went by when I was there where I was late, where I took a lunch break for too long. And I got a reputation for working hard, being reliable, doing the job that I was asked to do. And of course, even though I didn't end up working for ATSLS in an employment capacity, as in paid capacity, the references that I got from ATSLS allowed me to end up in London in the DPP. I ended up in the Old Bailey working on murder cases. In the Old Bailey, it was the most amazing experience. And had I not been committed and done everything that I believed I needed to do, those opportunities wouldn't have been provided to me. And now I saw Maria, beautiful Maria, on there asking a question about competing with younger students and young lawyers in terms of getting positions and so on and so forth. The sorts of things that I was talking about being reliable, doing a good job, throwing yourself into the work. These are the sorts of things that come with maturity, and perhaps in some respects, maybe being a more mature person gives you an advantage, perhaps even over younger students and young lawyers.
Fantastic, Patricia. And in terms of obviously all the skills that you've been adding to your resume all these years, the networks you've created, you've worked those very, very well. So you've gone at this with a plan, I can see, and you've known what you needed to do to make yourself stand out wherever you were going. So congratulations. That's a fabulous career path.
Oh, thank you very much. I was going to say just one very quick thing, and that was those networking opportunities from years ago from academia, they're still in place. They're still helping me, assisting me. Now, being a barrister, I'm very interested in not just what age group do I fall in? I can see that. I'm really showing my age. I'm actually 55 to 60. So I'm right up there. But anyway, I just filled that out. I don't know whether anyone's aware of it, but this thing appeared on my screen. So I just, yeah, I'm 56. So I just answered that, responded to it. But anyway, what was I saying? I was saying something about, oh yes, the networking, because I'm still interested in not just being a recipient, if that makes sense, of the law, but I mean, I'm very interested in critiquing the law and changing the law where it's not working. And a recent experience of that was I was dealing with a family law property matter, and there was domestic violence involved, and there's what's called a Kennan argument. And this argument, this Kennan argument, the threshold is very high. And so I sent off my abstract to the Law Reform Commission and suggested that a paper go in, and that's going ahead. So I'm still doing research, and those skills that I gained as an academic all those years ago, they're now helping me. There's a wonderful synergy between what I did before and what I'm doing now. I can hear a beautiful, I don't know what it is. It sounds like a rooster. He sounds very cute.
Yes, apologies one and all. I have a friend here with me, my assistant dog.
Oh, it's the dog. Oh my goodness.
Yes. No. Now tell me, Patricia, you've only recently been admitted to the profession in the Northern Territory.
Correct.
Yes. So now, had you had experience in the Northern Territory previously?
No, absolutely not. I'd only actually been to the Northern Territory twice. I'd only been to Darwin twice, and I was only there for a couple of days prior to my getting admitted in the Northern Territory. I think my experience with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Service, ATSLS, had quite an impact on me. And I felt as though being a lawyer for me was not necessarily about the money. So commercial law was something that I entertained the thought of, but I decided what I wanted to do was actually make a difference in the Northern Territory. So I was very attracted to assisting people who otherwise wouldn't even get legal representation. So that's why I went up there. I'm interested in family law, particularly criminal law. So the Northern Territory, I think, is a place where there's a great deal of injustice, and there's a great opportunity to, in some small way, do my part to, make a contribution, a legal contribution to the NT.
Fabulous. And one last question before I leave you, Patricia. Your acting experience through NIDA, are you using that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, especially being a barrister. And I think Matthew can probably speak to this. He has a very creative background as well. But I think it's definitely, being a barrister is all about persuasion. And there's a certain performative aspect to being a barrister. So that experience of studying at NIDA has certainly come in handy. There's no doubt about that.
Fabulous. I just don't know how we fit everything into a day, Patricia. Again, driven by your passions, a fabulous exemplar for us to follow. Thank you for that. Now, Clare, I might come to you now because there are synergies between you and Patricia. You've both started life as nurses in the caring profession,
Yes.
And you've come from there into law. Give us a snapshot of your career pathway.
Oh gosh. So I left high school at the end of year 11 at the tender age of 17, and I had always wanted to be a nurse, and nursing is what I did. I was a hospital trained enrolled nurse, and then worked in paediatrics and special care, which included working in London in hospitals over there. I had always had an interest in law, which probably wasn't the focus until I came back from London. I was probably a wee bit burnt out. I sort of had that compassion overload, empathy meltdown, and wanting to pivot in life. So I saw an ad actually in the Adelaide Advertiser to study law in Darwin, of all places, at the previous NTU, which is now CDU. And being a mature age student who had not done year 12, I had to, of course, go through all the mature age entry bits and bobs and pass that. And I signed up for a dual degree. I actually did a degree in law and IT because I thought, being a non-matriculating mature age student, I needed to sort of set myself apart from the others. But I must admit, even though I did the IT degree, other than probably the sort of practice management kind of side of those units, I perhaps haven't used that degree as much as I had intended initially. And when I was first admitted, my plans was I was going to be a commercial lawyer. I had no interest in being back in that human-centric area. I absolutely was not going to be a family lawyer. There was all sorts of things, and of course that all unravelled to be quite a different path for me as I went along. And yes, I probably propped up my studies with other work. So I was still working as a nurse while I was studying law, and at one stage I was also working in other places. So I worked at the cafe at the Darwin airport, and ticketing for Air North, all sorts of interesting bits and pieces. And I did some administrative work in different government departments in the Northern Territory. So I worked in the minerals and titles area as an admin officer, and then I obtained a AO6 position as a case manager in the Victims of Crime unit. So the compensation scheme in the Northern Territory. And when I first got that job, I had totally dismissed my nursing background skills, and I thought, I'd have a lot to learn and this, that, and the other. But I was able to interpret those medical notes and documents, and I would read things and I could actually visualise people. It became three-dimensional for me, and I was able to assist other case managers and assessors. Once I was admitted, I was gazetted as an assessor, and then I worked in native title and ab lands as a baby lawyer while I was doing that. And then I ended up in a private firm in Darwin before. Oh gosh, I've probably jammed a few things in there that I have consolidated. But I also went through a divorce in my fourth year of uni, and met my current defence spouse, who's in the army, and he was posted to Sydney when I was less than 2 years post-admission experience. So I went from Northern Territory, where there's a lot of work for junior lawyers and not really advertised, but Darwin is such a small community as far as the legal community goes. I also did some volunteer work at Darwin Community Legal Service, which is one of the CLCs, both as a student and once admitted as a lawyer. When we moved to Sydney, I was applying for jobs with 400 other people who had trained in Sydney. So it was quite challenging. And Sydney at that time was also going through the post-global financial crisis. So it was a very, very stressful time, not dissimilar to what everybody is going through with post or current COVID stand downs with employment and applying for jobs and things like that. So I actually ended up volunteering in the CLC sector in Sydney and working as a nurse in the casual pool at a well baby unit. And then eventually the principal solicitor at the first CLC that I used to volunteer at got all his staff to take their leave together so that they could offer me a short contract. And then the remaining time that I had in Sydney, I pretty much worked as a locum in 4 different CLCs. So I had quite a range of experience, including as locum principal in a city, which is in King's Cross. And that's quite an interesting and very colourful place to work. And then we were posted to South Australia, which is my hometown. And I worked for Public Trustee as a wills officer, and I worked for 2 other family lawyers before opening my own practice in July 2015. And I've been running my own practice since. That practice has now moved to Queensland with me. And I have continued to both volunteer and work in different CLCs in all the states that I've moved in. So
I think you're the most wonderful example, Claire, of the fact that law, like nursing, is, you know, it's something you can travel with. It translates across jurisdictions and across practice areas. So really no door is closed to you unless you choose to close it, by the sound of things.
That's right. And sometimes you've just got to be a little bit creative about how you open those doors. So sometimes they might be closed and that might be just a temporary hurdle and you just have to work out, well, okay, that's not going to work. I'll try plan B.
Yes. Yeah. And so you've been, as you say, you've brought your practice with you from South Australia to Queensland. You've told us that you're a military wife.
I am.
So I expect there's more travel in the cards for you.
Yes. So my partner will receive a posting order soon, actually in the next few weeks as we speak. So he's hoping to stay in Brisbane, but you're never guaranteed these things with the military. So
I think you need a t-shirt that says, have admission, will travel.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Correct. Yeah.
So in terms of your networks, they really are worldwide, I'm imagining. I mean, certainly right around the country here. And
yes.
You've got networks extending right over to the UK. Have you been able to use those in your legal career?
Yes and no. I guess initially when I was looking for work as a mature age student, I probably didn't think to utilise those networks as such. But the putting in the hard yards, the volunteering, the being there, the taking the time to get used to the different jurisdictions and things like that. And, you know, once people, I found the CLC sector in New South Wales to be very embracing. And I feel quite blessed to have worked with some very challenging and very rewarding matters across, you know, a bunch of different stuff. So I really have had varied legal experience across the board. Yeah.
Fabulous. And just lastly, I know that you've qualified recently as an independent children's lawyer. So to another string to your bow in terms of your family law experience as well. I'd love to ask you, going back to your nursing career and now in those practice areas as a lawyer, what does resilience look like? Because I think that's something that very early graduates find hard to come to terms with, how to build resilience so that they can bounce back when they're dealing with difficult matters. I expect your nursing training and also now your experience as a family lawyer has taught you a thing or two about resilience.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the thing with resilience is your life experience is what you bring to that. I won't sugarcoat things. There's been days where I have been what I've thought has been the lowest point in my life, and I've had to sort of pick myself up and start over. And the nursing skills are definitely transferable. So when I am with a client for the first time, I have realised how much I rely on those human skills. They are very transferable. And I know some of the junior solicitors who, in my perception, were academically a lot better than I, had struggled dealing with the human side of law. So yes, university teaches you all sorts of things, but life experience is a priceless entity when it comes to dealing with, people are grieving. They're grieving the loss of, a relationship or time with children or time with family, or depending on what their matter is about, sort of that victims of crime compensation area. People are grieving an injury, a loss of function, a loss of well-being, very, very challenging times. And to be able to sit with them and just allow them to, pretty much vent what they need to help push them in a direction where they can get the correct emotional support that they need. And then once somebody has the correct emotional support, they're able to make the logical decisions that they need regarding their legal matters. And yeah, I think those skills are priceless. Now, I didn't give myself enough credit in my baby lawyer years for those skills, but now I acknowledge them as, for what they are.
Absolutely. And I think that's, I know each of you on the panel brings so much to your practice as lawyers from what you've learned in your earlier lives and careers. So you're all incredibly courageous. And I think that's wonderful, just wonderful that we have lawyers like you with us. Now, thank you, Claire. I'm going to now lead off with Matthew Hickey. Matthew, another creative on the panel we've heard. Do tell us, where were you? I think, did you start law but then found your voice in other ways, or was it the other way around?
So I had started straight from high school in law school, and at about the end of my first year at law school, my family had a car accident. It was Christmas time, and I was born and raised in Ipswich, and my family had gone to Indooroopilly Shopping Town, which was the place to go back then. And we'd spent the day together, Christmas shopping and whatnot. It was about a week or so before Christmas. And we were about a street or two from home, and this poor old fellow who had driven all the way from Wollongong to spend Christmas with his family, I think he was in his early 80s, went through a stop sign and smashed into my family's car. And my parents were not very seriously injured, but injured enough to put them into hospital. And it caused me, because I personally suffered some sort of psychological trauma, I suppose, nothing serious, but serious enough to cause me to go and see a psychologist to get over the fear of being in a car again. And that sort of led me to think, what am I doing with my life? I was sort of 17 or 18. I'd been a relatively studious sort of high schooler. I'd always been involved in music and so forth. But anyway, I think that event caused me to think, gee, this law school thing's pretty dull. Maybe I could have been killed in this accident. Maybe I should do something else with my life. And around that time, I found myself asked to sing in a recording of a new Australian musical. And so I was this full-time law student. I went to participate in this recording with a whole bunch of people who were at that time at the Conservatorium here in Brisbane. And it seemed to me that they were having an awful lot more fun at university than I was. And so then I enrolled at the Conservatorium. So I spent 2 years at law school and then moved to the Con, and then did full-time study at the Conservatorium and part-time study at law school. And it was in about my final year at the Conservatorium when this group came together. The 10 Tenors was what it was ultimately came to be known as. And it was the height of Paul Keating's sort of economic rationalist period. There was not really any work for musicians, subject, I think, only to the period we're currently in. It was probably the worst period for artistic types in Australian history, certainly in my living memory. And so we, you know, at the time I was working at a bottle shop at South Brisbane, which has now been demolished, and most of my friends were pouring coffees and what have you. And we thought, well, we've got this 10 Tenors thing, why don't we sort of try to turn it into something? And I had, in fact, at that point gone back to law school to finish off my degree. And we got our first international gig. And I took about 6 months off, or at least I'd intended to take 6 months off. I'd gone off to see the academic advisor, who is now Justice Sarah Derrington, I hasten to add. Said, what do you think? Would it be okay if I took 6 months off? And she said, yeah, look, take 6 months off, but no more than that, or you'll be unemployable. And I ended up coming back to the law around 10 years later. And in the meantime, sort of built this company. I was the director of the company. I was a singer in the company, and we sort of built this thing quite by surprise and by accident. It ended up having about 50 full-time staff members. We were touring on the road with trucks and buses and chefs and crew from all over the world. We had an office here in Brisbane. We had an office in Germany, which was where we were based for the most part. And so sort of almost by accident, I found myself the CEO, if you like, of a company that had this multidisciplinary workforce. But around the same time, I'd become engaged to and then ultimately married to my now wife. I became ill at one point. I had a brush with cancer in 2002, which again was sort of my second near-death experience, which led me then to think, what am I doing with my life now? I've sort of fallen by accident into this music career. I'm sure it's fun, but it's not really what's filling me with a sense of direction and purpose. And so at that point, we began to have children. And of course, at that point, I was touring for about 40 weeks of the year all around the world. And I really didn't want to be away from my wife and children. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself. So I finished my study, and in fact, I enrolled externally as a law student. So I began my study at UQ, and I finished it as an external student at QUT. And so while my colleagues on the road were sort of playing computer games in the back of the tour bus, I have very vivid memories of completing law assignments in the bottom of the tour bus while overnighting from one city to another, and running this business. And so I left the music industry. I stopped being a singer in 2006, and I finished my PLT in 2009, I think it was. And I spent a brief period in a big firm. I worked at Minter Ellison for a little while. I had thought I would come to the bar, and of course, common wisdom was it made sense to go to a big firm like that and get some experience and contacts and things. But Sarah Derrington was right. I was unemployable, and I think I realised very quickly that that I couldn't stay very long in a firm like Minter Ellison and be happy. I knew I needed to know my place, and but I suppose I was aware. I mean, the profession has changed a lot, I think, in the last 10 years or so, and then it was still very, particularly a top tier firm, I think, was very conservative and very driven by a particular kind of white middle-aged male. And although I now am a white middle-aged male, back then, having especially worked in the arts, which was a very progressive kind of environment to be working in, I found it a difficult place to be. And that's no indictment on Minter Ellison. As I'm at pains to say, I think I was unemployable. And I realised pretty quickly that what I wanted to do was come to the bar. And so being really quite ignorant, I guess, and foolhardy in retrospect, I just came to the bar. And I got incredibly lucky in the early days with some initial opportunities that were presented to me as a consequence of the way I went through the bar practice course. And I've been practicing here ever since. And it's really funny. In the first sort of few years that I was a barrister, I was really quite... I tried really hard to hide my previous career, and I still, in a kind of embarrassed kind of way, often describe it as my misspent youth. I think I wanted to be taken seriously as a lawyer, and of course I still do. And so I didn't want to be thought of as that fruity musical guy, you know, the guy who had that interesting sort of career as a singer but isn't really serious about the law. And I think in the early days of my career at the bar, there were probably a lot of middle-aged, boring white men who did think that of me. They did think I was not... serious or formidable. And I've worked really hard, I think, over 10 years or so now to try to let my reputation speak for itself. But you can't escape who you are. You have to be who you are. And I suppose about 5 years into it, I realized that, look, I am who I am. I can only be myself. And practicing in a way which is authentic and genuine means that there will be some people who will never brief me. And I'm perfectly okay with that. But the people who want to brief a person like me will know who I am. And that was like a light bulb really for me. It was like flicking a switch. And the moment I decided to just embrace who I was and be genuine, it was like my career sort of had this extraordinary upward trajectory. And I don't say that in any self-aggrandizing kind of way, but I say it, I suppose, to give encouragement to those who might come to the law later, to not feel as though you have to fit into some particular pigeonhole. You know, sure, there are lots of lawyers who are homogenous and who seem like all other lawyers. You know, there is it'd be disingenuous for me not to concede that there's a particular kind of lawyer one meets all the time. But similarly, there are lots of lawyers who are very different. And I think increasingly the law is an environment, the profession permits you to practice in a way which is authentic and consistent with who you actually are. And I think having the wisdom of being a slightly older person permitted me to get to that point faster than perhaps I would have done if I'd been that person who started at UQ straight out of high school. If I'd stayed there, I think who I am as a 45-year-old man is very different perhaps from who I would have been if I'd not had that slight career divergence and come back full circle.
Matthew, the research tells us the value of creativity is greatly underestimated. And I expect that you explored your sense of creativity throughout your early years through music. And of course, that would then, you'd bring that to what you do now at the bar. Yeah,
that's a really good point, Ann-Maree. I think the most useful thing for me of having had, a career in show business, I suppose, is there is no money in the arts. You know, you don't get paid very well. I mean, people sort of had this idea because we were sort of slightly famous, I suppose. And so people had this idea that I must be rich, and it's just laughable. And what's really interesting now through this COVID-19 thing is that I think we're seeing for once and for all that people who are celebrities and people who are famous actually live on the smell of an oily rag. And I mention that only because it meant that in the arts, you have to be adept and flexible. You have to find ways to be able to do everything. You have to find ways to be able to do things economically and cheaply and without pretension or standing on ceremony about things. You have to be results focused because you can't afford to say, well, this is the best way to do it, so we'll do it that way. And what struck me, I suppose, about coming into the law, and I continue to see this, is that there's an orthodoxy, I suppose. There's a received wisdom about doing things in a particular kind of way, which is not always, in my view, necessarily focused on the client's best interests. You know, there's an idea that we do things in a particular way because that's the way we've always done it. And people have been increasingly less so, reluctant to question whether just because we've always done it that way means it's the best way. And I think there's a much greater place now than when I started at the bar for innovative thinking and creative approaches to getting the job done. Indeed, the fact that we're all talking to each other like this, the fact that the legal profession has been forced kicking and screaming into conducting trials in an electronic kind of way when this technology has existed for years is really interesting. And so I think for lawyers of the future, those coming into the profession, it's never been more important to be prepared to be creative and flexible and adept at confronting and solving problems in the most efficient and practical way possible. And I was really interested in hearing the things that Katie said earlier about her experience, you know, as a parent and as a community volunteer. You know, those sorts of qualities are just so important in this profession. And it's what gives mature students, I think, a real advantage over graduates. You know, if you're somebody who's been at high school and had no real responsibilities while you make your way through university, you know, sure, you've got some life experiences, but the skills and experiences, just being a person who's actually had to experience a real problem in their life and respond to it and bounce back from it, makes you so useful as a lawyer, you know, and I think enlightened employers see that. For me, I think one of the questions you raised with us earlier, Ann-Maree, is how do we differentiate ourselves coming to the law as a, you know, mature person? And I remember when I went to work at Minter Ellison in the first place, I sort of had this sense that maybe I wouldn't be what they were looking for. You know, I wasn't as young as the kids that were in the graduate clerk program with me. My marks, frankly, weren't as good as some of theirs were. I hadn't gone off and done a judge's associateship. But what I did have was a very firm view that I didn't want to go anywhere. You know, I'd been traveling for a really long time. And what I said to them was, look, if you take me, I will stay here. I'm not interested in taking your graduates program and then nicking off to the Middle East or to London or somewhere like that. What I'm actually looking for is to put down roots. And I meant that. You know, I'm still here in Brisbane 10 years later. As it turns out, I didn't stay at that firm. But I think it's that kind of, you know, need or something which makes you actually attractive to employers.
Absolutely. And I've got to say to our audience that, Matthew, I know you're telling us that you came to the bar with very little and, you know, you didn't really know anyone, you didn't have your contacts. Your peers have actually voted you one of the best lawyers of Australia 3 years in a row. So I think you're doing something right. There are people out there who think the world of you, which is wonderful.
That's very kind of you. Thanks.
And I want to also say that you, like everyone else on this panel, Matthew, give back. I know you're a director on various boards and committees. That's work that we all do in our spare time, and they're the passion projects in our lives. So I think a lot of lawyers not only hide their light under a bushel, they don't tell everyone exactly what they do with their time. And so when we say that lawyers do a great service to the community, it's not just in the courtrooms and it's not just on transactional files in the office. It's all of the other roles that lawyers play in the community. And
can I say something about that, Ann-Maree? I think I was really interested in something that Patricia said about you know, being interested in helping people, and it also something that Clare said about compassion fatigue. I like to think of myself as a person who really is interested in people. I like people. I'm interested in their stories. I have a great deal of personal empathy for other human beings and their experiences, and I think that's probably what drew me into the arts in the first place. But I recognized really early on in my legal career that I was actually, notwithstanding all of those characteristics, not very well equipped at working in the people parts of the profession. I couldn't be dispassionate to other people's pain. You know, I thought I'd be really good at crime and family law and these sorts of things. In fact, I'm terrible at those things because I just don't have the ability to not take it on. I did one matter in the last few years which involved people who'd been hurt very, very significantly. It was probably the only matter I've done in 10 years at the bar that involved people with hurt feelings. And it personally affected me enormously. The point of all of this is to say, because I feel that need to help people, and my practice is actually just companies suing each other, and that's just how I like it. I still feel the need to be a useful member of society. And so the way I can do that is by that activity that you've talked about, the way I can then sort of sleep soundly at night and not just be a a gun for hire to rich people, which is frankly what I am most days, is to use my skills in an extracurricular kind of way. And in particular, actually, this kind of thing. I feel so lucky to be able to talk to other junior practitioners and help to develop other people's skills. So even if you find yourself, as I have done, in a part of the law which is largely about rich people fighting each other, it doesn't mean you can't help people if that's what you feel called to do.
Absolutely. Now, team, I've got to tell you, we have 5 minutes left for Zoom call this evening, and I can see the chat actually going off. There's plenty of questions, and thank you to those panel members who are responding as we go. When we were preparing for this session, we were talking about a term I'd not heard used previously, the grey ceiling. And I think it's the elephant in the room. We've had a question from one of our audience members asking about a trend they perceive amongst certainly the top tier and perhaps the second tier to recruit only juniors, as in younger lawyers, into their grad programs. I'm wondering, have any of you experienced a stumbling block such as that? So a real hurdle where you've seen perhaps others not as qualified as you, certainly don't have the marks or the runs on the board that you've had, and you've just not made the grade because you are a mature aged law graduate. Has that been a hurdle for anyone?
Can I say, I'll say, actually no, would be my answer. I did not have that experience at all. In fact, probably more the opposite. I've found it to be a real asset. For a lot of the reasons that the other panelists have said, like Matthew said, that life experience, those real runs on the board, and in my case, particularly that enormous amount of community engagement was incredibly valuable. And so, I've had to do the same as all law school students. You get the good grades, be on the Law Society, tick all the boxes. It's kind of what you do, but it's certainly my age, I haven't found yet to be an issue at all. And going into Shine, which is a fairly big corporation, so I didn't experience any of that. And in terms of sort of addition to what Matthew was saying about wanting to stay put, additionally to that, because I'm regional, staying regional also helped, because there's plenty of work in the regions. And I also go to a regional university, and one of the issues is everyone wants to hot-tail it to the big city and do the big city law thing. And yet the boutique industry, which is enormous and has enormous value and experience available if you're willing to just be regional. And that was a big part of my opportunity, was just saying, actually, I want to be country and I want to stay in this location. So that would be my encouragement, that there's opportunities out there if you want to go. And I often don't understand where, a city person, you can spend a couple of years in the country, get your foot in the door and then go elsewhere. It's an opportunity and experience. And a lot of city people just won't, pass up real opportunities to get into the law, get jobs regionally, because they just focus on the city.
That's right, Katie. And I think what happens in regional centres is that you get more responsibility a lot earlier in your career because you're there on the spot and they trust you with their clients. So absolutely, I encourage regional practice if you get an opportunity to try it.
Yeah.
Any other hurdles while we're here? And I love the fact that we're taking the negatives and turning them into positives.
I was going to say, I could probably add on the hurdles about graduate programs and things like that. I didn't actually do a traditional graduate.
Sorry.
Woof, woof, that's okay.
I shall mute my dog.
All good. So I didn't do a traditional graduate clerkship. I was employed as a case manager under the Victims of Crime Comp scheme at the time that I was doing my GDLP. So I did the maximum amount of electives and I did the minimum amount of hours, and I actually did that in my own time. So I got in touch with one of the solicitors who worked in the litigation team, who I had also worked for as a secretary when I was a student going through, and he was actually my supervisor for my minimum 20 hours, I think it was, that I did. So I did the additional units, and yeah, worked full-time, full caseload, processing victims' compensation matters. And yes, so not traditional. I did apply for the traditional graduate clerkships, but I wasn't chosen, and I did apply for positions as a judge's associate with the different judges in the territory, but missed out. But there are workarounds. There's always workarounds, and never say never. Never say never.
Actually, can I just say something about the grey ceiling?
Please.
In my experience, even though there may be very, very few opportunities for young would-be lawyers under the age of 25, scholarships and so on and so forth, and I say very few because in reality they are very few and far between. The greatest challenge for me, I can honestly say, has been myself. The self-doubt, the negative self-taught, the negative self-talk, that has been my greatest challenge. And whilst it obviously didn't dominate to the point where it was crushing and I gave up and all the rest of it, at times I would look around the room at university and think, my goodness, I could be, really, I'm old enough to be the grandmother of these people that are going through my degree with me. Should I actually be here? But one thing I did manage to do, which really helped, and hopefully for those of you out there who, I guess you probably, whoops, I'll just get that back. Probably, I suspect most of you would be younger than me even. As I said, I'm 56. But what helped me was saying, I'm not in competition with the people in my classroom. I'm not in competition with young lawyers. I'm not in competition with anyone. I'm running my own race. I'm studying this law degree because I want to be a lawyer. I'm not doing this for anyone else. I'm not doing it to make anyone happy. I'm doing anyone other than me happy. I'm doing it because this is something I want to do. I have a right to do it, and I am going to do it. And I think if you can just replace that negative self-talk with, it's my race, and I have the right to run my own race, and I am going to run it, and I'm sticking around, and I'm going to do this. Just wait and see. Yeah. Watch this space.
I certainly will be watching this space. My favourite quote from you tonight, Patricia, was, don't say, why shouldn't I? Always ask, why wouldn't I? And I think that's the note we're going to leave everyone with tonight. I've got to say, I never found inspired by my colleagues. You are extraordinary people, and learning just that a little bit more about each of you this evening has taken you all to another level in my eyes. You're extraordinary, and I'm very proud to call you my colleagues in the profession. To our audience, I need to say thank you so much for your participation. We've had more than 100 people online chatting with us this evening, and they've been asking the most extraordinary questions, and I know many of you have taken the time to ask, so thank you for that. This now brings to a close this segment of our Admission to Practice Academy. There are more segments coming for the remainder of this week, so I encourage you all to stay tuned. This, like every other segment, has been recorded and will be made available to everyone. For those who couldn't be with all the members of the audience, could I say thank you to Katie, Patricia, Clare and Matthew. You are extraordinary practitioners. We are very lucky to have you in the profession. Can I say thank you to my colleagues, Jackie Owen and Ellen Rees from the college. Oh, we've got this, here are the polls, the result of the age bracket of all our participants this evening. There you are. I won't dare share my age. I'm older than everybody. Just, if that makes you feel better, there you go, and I'm still kicking. All right then, thank you everybody on the panel. Thank you audience. We'll see you here again at the Admission to Practice Academy. Good night now. Thank you
so much everyone. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.